All right, hello everyone and welcome. My name is Patrika Elise and I'm so excited that you've all decided to join us today. I'm here with AI4 to bring you our next webinar, AI for Customer Service from Call Centers to Chat Support. I just have a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. So first off, we want to make sure that we use the Q&A instead of the chat for your questions. This is an important way for us to keep the questions organized so that we can engage with you. Next, feel free to ask lots of questions. We want to make sure that our panelists answer your questions and they're very excited to engage with you today. So without further ado, I would love for the panelists to go ahead and join us on our virtual stage by turning on their cameras and turning on their mics. Welcome everyone. All right, so let's get started with some self-introductions. John, would you like to kick us off?
Sure. Pleased to meet everybody. My name is John Finneran. I look after financial services marketing at Sinequa, which is an enterprise search company. My background, I've marketed and sold to financial services most of my career. I worked for Samsung and Apple as well. And I spent like a decade working for the founders of Genesis, call center software, which is hopefully relevant to this. That's me.
Awesome. Megan, would you like to go next?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Megan Merrick. I'm the Senior Manager of Messaging and Brand Engagement at Freshly. Been with Freshly just over 4 years now. Started out as a live chat agent within our CX department, and now I oversee social media moderation, messaging, and AI engagement.
Thanks, Megan. Lisa.
Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Micho. I am Director of Product Management at Interactions. My background is, in my previous life, I was actually an academic doing research in natural language processing, and then I transitioned into industry. Last 6 years, I've been working with conversational AI technologies in the contact center space, both from an engineering perspective and now as a product manager.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa. Deba, on to you.
Thank you. Again, thank you for the opportunity to include me in the panel. I'm Deba Sahoo. I'm currently at Fidelity Investments in Boston. I'm a Senior Vice President and Head of Product for Customer Journeys, where my team is really focused on simplifying, digitizing, and really transforming the B2B customer journeys for our 401k record keeping business. And so as part of it, we focus on transforming these customer journeys that could start from prospecting to onboarding to ongoing servicing. And we apply a lot of new technologies, including AI and digital capabilities, Salesforce, data exchange, really kind of simplify and transform customer acquisition and customer service journeys.
Wonderful. All right, let's move on to our last panelist, Ahmad.
Thank you, Patrick. My name is Ahmad Shabazz. I'm humbled and honored to be a part of the speaker series here. I am currently head of our community operations organization at Snap Inc. In my previous life, I've been at Airbnb, Google, Facebook, Deloitte Consulting. And prior to that, I was in the Marine Corps for 6 years. So I'm looking forward to a great discussion here today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our panelists. We're excited to have you here. All right, let's kick off question 1. So our first question is, broadly speaking, are organizations using AI for customer service? If so, to what end? All right, I'm going to kick it to Lisa first.
Thanks. Well, I would certainly hope that the answer to that is yes, because I work for a company that provides AI in the customer service space. So I think that the biggest way in which I've seen AI being used in customer service has got to be around the idea of self-service, the idea that we don't need to handle all customer service needs through direct contact with a live agent if an AI can handle that. So in terms of a conversational AI, something that can lead someone through either voice interaction or text interaction that gets them to whatever use case they need to execute without having to wait, and listen to that. Your call will be answered in the order in which it was received.
Yeah, I'll chime in there. Lisa, completely agreed that from like an AI customer service perspective, the self-service is key for us. At Freshly, we've been trying to figure out exactly how to use AI to support our customers, whether they're pre-sales, directly after post sales or customer support. And we found that the support part is tricky because, like you just said, it's nice to be able to offer AI in like a voice channel or through live chat or, you know, whatever channel it may be, but sometimes it can cause some friction for customers and then they get frustrated and drop off. So really trying to provide that value and allow them to self-serve themselves when they can and when they can't, making it really easy to talk to an agent.
Yeah, both Megan, you and Lisa, you're spot on, right? I think for us, and particularly some of my previous stops, right? It's about demystification, right? Demystifying just what is AI, right? What does it mean, and how do we make it practical, you know, tangible, pragmatic, right? Those are the questions that folks really seem to have some concerns around or fears, right? Because it's new, essentially, for this space. And what are the differentiators, right? What does machine learning mean versus deep learning, right? And how can we make these opportunities available to be predictive rather than reactive? And so, yeah, I want to echo Lisa's sentiment. I hope it's yes, but from my experience, it hasn't been readily adopted because there's still that foreignness to it. And so for us, I spend a great deal of time just around the education component, right? So that I can gain buy-in, sort of take some almost a pilot approach, if you will, a sample set, and show what can be done. And then folks are usually amazed by what the data yields, right? And how quickly you can turn things around, and they're more apt to adopt. So I agree totally. I think there's a lot that we can do in this space. I think we're at the very tip of the iceberg, and there's far more ice below what we can see versus what we have our eyes on set today.
Yeah, so I would, I would say again, I agree with everything that Lisa, Megan, or Ahmad had said. I'll add to it. My team is focused much more on the B2B side. I would say, in addition to everything we're talking about, conversational AI and all, we also apply AI in many cases in really supporting our customer service associates, because it's a much more complex relationship type of engagement. What that means is it could be in multiple use cases. One, I would say, like prediction use cases, where we actually predict what product we should position to our clients based on a lot of different factors, and how our client service folks actually present those products. The same thing will be true for, let's say, research and insights. Really, our client service reps, they are looking at a lot of information, both internal and external, to actually gain insights and share that and discuss that with their clients. And how do we use AI to actually really navigate through all the internal, external, structured, unstructured data, produce insights that are much more relevant to the client service teams and they can use. And the third thing I would also say, in much more task automation, where we're automating tasks for those client service reps using AI. It could be, call routing, it could be document extraction, it could be document AI, it could be natural language processing, to really automate all the tasks for the client service folks so that it saves their time, it saves clients' time, things are much more accurate, you remove risk, like you predict and fix errors. So we apply AI in a lot of those use cases in addition to the virtual assistant and chatbots and everything else.
Yeah.
Thank you all. Yeah. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, Lisa and I agreed I'd go last. So to echo on the B2B side as well. So, and Deba and I have been on panels before. So AI4 kind of owes us. So I agree with everything, because I've been around call centers for a while, and kind of the self-service point from Megan. It's just the technology has changed. The strategy has stayed similar in that you try to address routine questions and less complicated with software, whether IVRs or and so on in the early days. And in the early days, popping up the customer's call information was an innovation, and lots of companies made money on it. So, and then you're just trying to reserve the people's skills and training and engagement and to like Deba's business. When you are talking about your investments, retirement, funding children, and so on, you want a human to help you. So that kind of strategy, I don't think has really changed that much. The automation of the routine is easier than is often claimed, but you still want, especially in regulated and financial services, you want that human touch and advice. And then to Ahmad's point, so the business we're in, Sinequa, is really enterprise search. So we're kind of helping humans. So once you get to the point of engagement and having a conversation, you're calling because you need something, you need some information, you need an answer to your question. So you got to find that information. So like the automation gets to that point. And then for us, a bit like Lisa's background in NLP, we came out of an academic lab in France, and we were doing NLP before it was a thing. And it's in the product. So it's underneath there. And people often don't realize that they're using AI. And there's NLP and machine learning in there, but it's kind of in the product. So you're kind of hiding the technical complexity of it underneath. So I think it's continuation of a strategy, and people may be using NLP and AI and not really know that they are, which is probably a good thing.
That's a great point. And I think that's a great intro into our next question. So our next question is, what opportunities does AI provide when it comes to customer service? And we want examples, please. So I'm going to toss this one over to Ahmad.
Yeah, great question. I think so. For me, I think I'm going to answer that in two parts. The first part is AI, whether we're talking about machine learning, deep learning, other components, it opens up the world for us to be cross-functional partners because we can solve more issues or challenges than just what lies within our particular space. And so for me, as I talked earlier about having that sort of educational component, what I've been able to do throughout this whole educational component, which I call it an internal roadshow, right? We've gathered and garnered folks to get on board because we can help solve some of the things for them. In my role today, I own application product quality. So it's a fantastic connection, right? Very rarely do you have this kind of insight or relationship directly with the product team, right? So we're situated very nicely to be plugged into the entire roadmap, specifically around new product introduction. And therefore we get our ears to the ground a lot earlier so we can anticipate or be better prepared on how we're going to support said launch. As a result of that, we're also able to discern and dictate lessons learned from previous launches, incorporate that in sort of a human computation kind of a manner while we plug and chug on this whole idea of machine learning and deep learning. And we 360 feedback loop that back to our product team. So the real example here is this. We launch X product, right? There are a lot of lessons learned as we move towards monetization, which is what you see today, right? In our stock price and in its growth. And we say, hey, here are the things that we're hearing about. Here's what we're being contacted about. Here's what we anticipate because we know we have these dimensions that make sense and they're very directly correlated to what we've seen in the past. We should address this prior to launch. And so when you think about a real world scenario, it's about making our 360 feedback not just tangible and practical, right? Where we know there are solutions, but we become predictive based off of all of the data we're able to churn through at a much faster rate, right? With greater granularity. And we're able to either triangulate, right? Or forecast what we think it will be, and we can address those issues and challenges prior. So that's a real world example. We use it day in and day out. And we're, once again, I over-index on saying this, we're only at the tip of the iceberg, right? We're just now learning how we can better apply this. But the value proposition, particularly in real world experiences, the squeaky wheel gets oiled, right? So the more verticals, the more internal organizations you get on board, you can actually influence and lead the way and impact and solve more than just what's in our wheelhouse that we own today.
You know, Ahmad, one of the things that you said earlier that really resonates with me is the role of being an educator and answering the question about what is AI, because I feel like that is a huge part of a lot of what I do, because I, particularly because I came from a background of the science part of AI. And for so many people in the customer contact center space, AI is this sort of magical box. and people don't know what it is and what it can do and what its strengths are and what its limitations are. And I think Megan sort of you talked about that, that limitation aspect of it, which is challenging. And there are so many different ways in which we can leverage it. It is, of course, not just a wishing well. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to bring AI into my contact center. It's going to solve every problem forever. And I don't want to like jump on one of our questions coming up about challenges, but we could get to that in a second. But some of the ways in which AI some of the opportunities that it provides, you already touched on data and insights getting from the data. So I will pick on since John, you said that in many ways the technology in the contact center is not a new thing, and that we have the IVRs, the idea of applying software to help with questions like routing. One of the reasons why nobody feels that an IVR is a good experience is because of the limitations of what the technology was when it was first envisioned. Even if it's something keyword or key phrase based, it's still a situation where in order to get you to the use case you want, you have to go through a series of steps to progressively refine what it is you want to do, because you can only be provided with 3 or 4 possibilities at a time. And part of that is the limitation of how it's actually getting you to that case. Whereas if we can actually put a conversational AI up front, and instead of saying, if you'd like to inquire about your bill, press 1. If you'd like to pay off a balance, press 2. But actually say, hi, I'm a virtual assistant. What do you want to do today? You're taking that entire tree that people would normally have to traverse to get to the use case they want, and you are making it the depth of 1 by saying, instead of progressively refining what you want, use language to express, this is what I want, in an open-ended prompt. That's very difficult, and it was not, as you said, the technology is evolving. We are just finally getting to the point of natural language understanding where we can do that. We can open that question up and say, of the dozens of different things that we could help you with today, say it in your own words, and we'll get you to that use case in 1 step, rather than spending 5 minutes pressing 1, then 4, then 5. So it's a way better interaction, even if we don't have perhaps the capability of doing that use case entirely with self-service. Even if that means getting you to an agent, at least you're getting into the right agent queue faster.
Yeah, I wasn't recommending IVRs, or Megan had thrown me off the panel.
Yeah, I'll add. I think beyond what Ahmad and Lisa said, I would say I think it's true for B2B, but also for more complex customer service interactions. That I think there's a lot of things where AI is directly able to automate things that people talked about. But more, I would say, I see a lot of opportunities in augmented intelligence, where it's not purely making everything straight through, but really how AI is going to augment our either client service associates or clients directly to perform that task much more efficiently and faster and quicker and much more accurate. So I'll give some examples. Let's say, the prediction problem I talked about, or search, research, insights, task automation, where when a client is calling or client is actually engaging in something, it is still a complex problem, but there are many part of the problem you can actually automate using AI, and then the rest you can present it back to your customer service rep or a client, and then you apply human intelligence on top of what AI actually presents. And if you combine it both ways, I think much more powerful. And over time, you actually start to move much more into the cognitive space. So I see there's a journey over time where I think in the past, or maybe recently, we have done much more straight through processing, simple things using AI. I think more and more we're getting into complexity. And then the augmented intelligence view will actually keep moving in that spectrum. And over time, with NLG, NLU, and all kind of stuff, we will be much more smart, and then the humans will be focused on much more higher cognitive tasks versus the routine automated tasks.
I'll chime in there. I think that definitely agree with everything everybody said. It really comes down to AI providing some type of value to either the customer or to the organization. And I think when you can pair that together where everybody benefits, that's where people tend to be the happiest. We've found that trying to master a couple of different pieces has helped us, again, like Lisa, not trying to jump too far to the challenges, but in terms of being able to actually provide customer service to our customers, being able to have smart AI. So when we can recognize who our customers are as soon as they're on our website, being able to leverage tracking notifications or tracking links or delivery notifications to our customers, especially if they're just hovering in their account and they have a delivery that day, they're probably looking for their food. And then going back to self-service, going beyond those FAQs, tier 1 issues to be able to help a customer report an issue, cancel a delivery, skip a delivery, edit a delivery, create an order. A lot of customers don't want to necessarily chat with customer support. They just want to be able to do what they want to do. And if we're putting a wall up where they have to wait in a queue on the phone, on chat, send an email, that's going to just, again, come back to that friction experience. And then the idea of actually supporting value to the organization. One of the things that we've been trying to do at Freshly is understand which conversations provide the most amount of value to our customers. And we found that people who are joining Freshly, if they're on our menu, having a conversation with customer support is going to keep them and retain them as customers longer. And so if you are on our menu, we don't want you to chat with a bot if you're signing up. We want you to chat with an agent right away. And so how can we allow AI to support that where we're not trying to FAQ, funnel you down tier 1 issues? We want to get you to support immediately.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's all completely right. So what Lisa said as well is that for us, the holy grail is really understanding the intent of the searcher. So in Deba's world, if you call up and say, like IVR, it doesn't give you it doesn't make any effort to really understand your intent unless you hit 0 or 1 or whatever. So it's just very constrained. So it's a pretty bad experience and not very helpful. But you're still improving with AI, improving the self-service. And then if somebody calls up and says, can I, pay whatever, college fees, personal example. But then, like for instance, what's interesting in Deba's world and everybody's world, in fact, in the US, worrying about retirement, when you call up and say, how much money have I got in this mutual fund? Well, that's the surface question, but really, and then you've also done your Fidelity calculator and tells you you'll be able to retire in 41 years from this date if you save half of your money. I'm just joking, Deba, but the point is that what you're really worried about is, can I retire in my lifetime? And you're getting to that intent, which triggers, hey, I want advice, not the sort of surface reason for making the call or contact.
These are all really great insights. Thank you. I'm excited to move into the next question because I know we've been hitting on it quite a bit. So the next question is, what challenges do organizations encounter when implementing or actively using AI for customer service? And again, we'd love to hear these examples. So I'm going to go ahead and toss this one to Megan.
Awesome. Thank you. I know we've sort of touched on it throughout. AI is just super tough to master from a CX perspective. And so agreed that there are plenty of challenges and hills to climb. At Freshly, we have launched 3 different types of bots over the last 8 months. We launched a tier 1 FAQ bot on Facebook back in, I want to say May of last year. We just launched a new version of a live chat bot at the beginning of February. And then tomorrow we're getting ready to launch our new and improved version of a messenger bot on Facebook that can do a little bit more than just tier 1 issues. And I would say that the main challenges that we have seen at Freshly, first and foremost being abandonment, people who start engaging with AI and then realize that it's AI and then leave, whether that is an IVR and they hang up and they send an email, or they start chatting with a bot, they realize that the bot is going to try to help them, they depart. And so going back to what Lisa said before, making it really easy to ask a question, and not just make it easy to ask a question, but make it so that we understand what's being asked of us. And if we can't help automate a response, then we need to make it easy to connect with an agent right away. And so I see a lot when we partner with different companies, all these different fallbacks and asking a customer to repeat their question or retype it in a different way. That just frustrates the customer. It creates friction and it will cause them to channel hop. And the other thing we saw was this idea of deflection. And I think that when a lot of organizations adopt AI, they want to see 50% deflection, 75% deflection. But what are we missing in those conversations? And are we missing out on having really important conversations with customers where, okay, they're going to abandon, we're going to see it as deflection, but then they're going to cancel or they're not going to order from us again. So how do we make sure that we can get customers talking to us, allow them to see the value in AI, self-service themselves, talk to customer support if they can't, so that way we can retain them longer.
I think, you know, when you talk about that, the impact on the customer experience by that dreaded no match response, that I'm sorry, I didn't understand you, could you please restate the question? Or even worse, when the AI responds with a misclassification. So they say one thing and it twigs on the fact that, oh, the word pay was in there, so they must want to pay their bill or something. So, you know, one of the biggest challenges I think that is out there is that, and again, I'm going to take this from the perspective of somebody who's been on multiple sides of this, from the science and otherwise, is that AI, particularly given that the vast majority of AI approaches are machine learning based, does nothing without enormous amounts of data. So in order to correctly understand what it is that this person wants, which is the number one thing that is going to make them have a good experience, is because we've had studies that show that a customer doesn't need to talk to a human being if the AI successfully resolves their problem effectively and efficiently, then they're fine. But, you know, people have had such bad experiences. That's why they want to zero out. They want to get out of that situation. So how do we do that? Well, the only way to really classify the intent of the customer in a robust way is an enormous amount of data. And there are so many platforms out there that will say, hey, give me 10 example sentences that will represent what this particular use case, how that should be expressed, and click train and I'll create a machine learning model that will understand this intent. And anybody who actually knows anything about AI, and like I said, it's not a wishing well, it's not a magic box, it needs an enormous amount of data to really learn how to classify a sentence. And the question is, where does that data come from? Because the designer creating an application, coming up with a few example sentences, is not using the same language as the target user, right? So you actually need to collect data from a real application, and becomes this lovely chicken and egg situation. You can't really create your chatbot or virtual assistant without the data, but you don't have the data until the virtual assistant or chatbot is talking to your people. And that's one of the reasons why at Interactions, I like to say we take a very pragmatic approach to AI. We recognize that there are certain limitations, and we've always had this approach to understanding that involves human help. So during the early days of deployment, when a system is just starting to interact with real users, we actually have the AI be able to, what I like to say, phone a friend. It actually in real time can send an utterance that it's not certain about to a human who is not an agent, is not handling the conversation, but all it's doing is providing, hey, this is the use case they want to invoke. I know you're not certain about it, so I'm just going to help you within a second or two to classify that sentence. And in real time, in a very short period of time, we are collecting enormous amounts of tag data. So then we can actually apply hundreds of thousands of training sentences that represent the actual users. So we have that we can sort of skip over that learning and not doing well phase, because it can perform very, very highly and very well really early on in deployment. But I would say that's like the single hardest challenge, is knowing, is recognizing that you have to collect that data. And in a lot of situations, that data doesn't pre-exist. If you're particularly going out into a digital channel and you haven't been out in that digital channel before, you don't have sentences that represent what your users are going to say. So you have to have some other way of collecting the data.
Yeah, so I'll jump in. I think I agree with everything Lisa said, but I'll probably come at a different perspective, more, let's say, from a product or a technology perspective, not so much from an AI perspective. I would say from a product perspective, I think AI, there are a lot of good point solutions, a lot of cases successfully being applied, but in many cases, application at scale is still a challenge. Like, how do you actually apply things at a large scale where you're getting a lot of scalable benefits? It's still a challenge. I think in many cases, whether it is chatbots or other agents, like we have successfully done pilots, even initial rollouts, and things are working, but still scaling is a big challenge. And then second thing I would say, it's kind of the going beyond the customer engagement layer. So let's say a person actually calls, a client calls, there is an interaction that happens, but then a lot of the customer service actually happens after that. It goes into internal systems, something happens, right? So then it gets into, especially for legacy systems and all, gets into a lot of messy stuff. So how do you kind of really figure out the data layer, connecting everything? I think that is a challenge. It continues to be a challenge because one, it's not just a technical challenge. I think it's also a business challenge in terms of making sure all the leaders understand that challenge well. We decide to invest in that long term, make sure that we're actually building those kind of foundations to get to scale. So I would say that is another layer of challenge that exists beyond what Lisa and others have shared.
Yeah, so I agree with all that. So in a sense, that all of the points, in a way, more systems, more AI, more approaches just means more of everything, and makes it more complicated. And like everybody's familiar with the very large, call centers, or even, medium size, how much stuff is underneath. So we're kind of in the business of picking up the pieces. Like dealing with messes may not be, but so for instance, the customer journeys, what's happened with, retail banks, branches are by appointment, call centers, people work from home for the first time. It's pushed people onto the, mobile apps, which a lot of people may not have been familiar with. Call centers get bombed with calls and all the rest of it. And then you have to search across, and there's more training, to Lisa's point as well, and Megan's point is that, okay, you already have a bunch of systems to train on, and now you're training on AI systems and all the rest of it. It's a very complicated environment. So I'm not claiming panacea, but it's kind of search experience. Everybody knows how to search now. See, we're almost like picking up the pieces. So if the automation hasn't kind of worked as well as it should have done, self-service, IVR, we're sitting at the back going, oh, we'll catch that, we'll catch that. And you go into a human, which is what often happens anyway. It's not optimized, obviously, for things. And I think the degree of application of AI will increase, but there's still a lot of, to Deba's point, scaling that to take on, the number of calls and diversity of agent in, for example, I'm more familiar with Fidelity's business than anybody else's, but you've got people who can give investment advice, you've got people who can help you with your 401k transfer. These are very sort of different questions and queries.
Yeah, let me just, I guess, I think I'm the last one. Let me just sort of cap off, right? I think it's hard to add to what has been really a comprehensive kind of response. But one thing that we are looking at, and we know it's a challenge is, and I think you've all alluded to it at some point, how do we provide optionality, right? So that at any point throughout the journey, someone can get to us. And that's driven by the data that we capture, whether it's, we call it big data, whether we call it AI, by whatever means we call it, right? How do we know to provide optionality where we traditionally know we have these kick out points throughout the journey? That's number one. Then the second one is, how do we discern between those customers or parts of our community that really want to self-service, right? Because we're dealing with multi-generational individuals at this point, right? Who wants to be self-serviced, right? Versus who wants to talk to someone, you know, a live person, or as a matter of fact, who wants to do something in between and deal with the virtual bot, that kind of a thing. And so for us, deciding where and how we surface the opportunity for folks to deal with the place that they feel most comfortable has been a challenge, because there are some folks who are very high touch, right? They may have a high spend with regard to the lifetime of that relationship, however you're defining that, whatever metric you're using. And so we want to better understand, when do I provide a bespoke, right, really sort of hand holding, sort of white glove kind of experience? And how do I balance that with, let me solve those folks who want to be solved individually, because that's where they lie best. And at the end of the day, we cannot ignore, right, the elephant in the room, cost, right? So we want to understand, how do we strike that balance? Because at the end of the day, we can provide whatever we like if we had endless spending. Our budgets are typically derived by some sort of variables or drivers, whether that's volume, X, Y, or Z. So we need to figure out what is that perfect mix, right? What is that nice mix? I think, and how do I make this anecdotal, right? One of the things that I deal with on the daily is not only conveying that narrative, right? But how do I show for us, because typically in this space, we are a cost center. How do I show that retention is a driver for revenue, right? How do I show that the network effect, because someone had a great experience, is a driver or a contributor to revenue? How do I take my cost, right? And my goal for our organization is to break even, right? So you can take the cost center moniker off of my plate. How can I break even, right? And so there are these unique ways and these unique metrics we can use. But the challenge is, again, taking all of this great data that we're getting, which could quite frankly be overwhelming initially, because you're not used to getting that level of granularity, that level of visibility, and putting that and package that in a form that everyone can consume, and they can see the value in those metrics that I mentioned, which at the end of the day help drive revenue. So that balance is not an easy job for folks in our space, right? You almost have to double down on getting better at telling that story, right? And using objective data, albeit we know it's in a subjective manner, and get that switch to flip, and they understand better how we can actually achieve a symbiotic relationship across our side of this house versus those that are driving revenue.
Excellent points all around. Thank you all. So that kind of leads us into our next question about a very significant challenge. Has COVID-19 changed anything about customer service? And if so, does AI factor in anywhere? So I'm going to kick this one over to Deba.
Yeah, thanks. I would say, I think, again, I think everybody will probably agree this is a resounding yes. I think COVID has dramatically changed customer service. Definitely better for the long term. I think the short term we can discuss. I would say, if I look back at last year, I think in general, we have seen, again, depends on what industry you're part of, but in certain industries, the calls, the engagements from clients have dramatically increased in the last year. I can say definitely for the financial services industry, it definitely did when COVID hit, with everything around savings, money, CARES Act, government funding, everything around it. But so is true even like last month, when there was, all the hype, trading and everything around it, right? So the customer service needs have dramatically increased, and working from home and doing everything from home, right? That put a lot of challenge. But if I think about all of that, right, I think one way it helped in doing two things: accelerating the overall digitization of service. I think a lot of the things that were still on the cusp or on the border, the adoption by clients, adoption by client service associates, adoption by business leaders to invest and fund, all of those things dramatically have changed for the better, in the sense that a lot of more people are much more comfortable in doing service in a much more digital manner, and a much more increasingly digital manner, right? And then second thing I'm seeing, I don't think AI is something that immediately you can just build out of the blue, right? It takes time. So it didn't really impact as much last year, I would say, but long term, I've seen the conversation dramatically has improved. So I would say if you think about like 10, 15 years back, maybe 20 years back, when digital capabilities were kind of new, they were being thought through in that way, but over time, they have gone mainstream. Any problem we try to solve for, we think digital. Everybody, whether it's sales, marketing, operations, tech, everybody knows what it is. Everybody thinks it that way. I have seen due to COVID, as we're solving more problems, I'm seeing AI is also going mainstream, where the concept of AI is better understood. People think about this because if you think about the problem, like the binary problems, you can solve through digital capabilities, right? When it gets into cognitive, much more unstructured information, you need AI. And I think people understand that in a lot of the problems, everything has a binary component of the problem, and then some unstructured component. People are thinking AI all the time. I hear that in all the discussions, whether we deploy it or not. I have seen that is going mainstream, which is a good thing, because over time, I think it will become part and parcel of investments. It will be part and parcel of product management. It will become part and parcel of tech budgets. So I see long term a lot of really good future as this goes more and more mainstream.
I couldn't have said it better. I think you're spot on, right? With this sort of new norm, right? This unprecedented time, it's forced organizations to look at alternatives and accelerate because this is a can we've been kicking down the road for quite some time, right? And so now I think folks are more apt when you talk about, and I've mentioned it earlier, that educational component, people's ears are more open now, right? If there was ever a time to strike while the iron's hot, it's today, right? Because we know we have to shift our minds. I'm talking about organizations in its entirety on how we think and do business, whether that's having folks come in the office versus how we interact and engage with our customers, our consumers, our community throughout the journey, right? And as a result of that, now is the time to strike. And you're right. It's we've now had to embrace how can we continue to operate at the levels we were used to operating prior to this pandemic, and how can we continue to do that and then still grow the business? And how do we do that, right? Because we have so many people that are working from home. We have disparate groups now. It's a lot different than being in the office and huddled up over a whiteboard and trying to go through this with a spreadsheet. And as a result, now we need to have this access to all this data, but access is only the first part. The second part of that is, what can we do with that data? What does it tell us? How can we sift through it quickly? How can we be closer to real time? How can we disseminate this throughout different parts of the organization that see it differently? And then how can we collectively figure out a plan forward? That's where AI, that's where machine learning, deep learning comes into play, right? Because now you can slice and dice so many different ways, near real time, if not real time. So I couldn't have said it any better. You're right. We have the educational component still, but that lift is not as big as it used to be. And if there was ever a time you're going to strike, I think now is that time, but you have to be patient because people have to comprehend, get their arms around it. But once they do, then I think you're going to start seeing a tidal wave and shift to adopting this. Last thing I'll say, and I'll be quiet. There's an old statement I used to say, right? You either get down or lay down. At some point, if you miss this boat, because a lot of organizations are not sitting here second guessing themselves. They're putting their foot in the ground, they're planting and they're going. And by putting this out in the wild, they're getting themselves ahead of the game because they're learning, right? So if you're seeking perfection and 100% kumbaya buy-in, that's going to be crippling. So you have to get enough momentum with a few voices that can help you, because the squeaky wheel gets oil, with enough voices to get some kind of budget or insight or guidance or even executive sign off. But you have to make a move now, because the longer you wait, the further you get behind the 8 ball. And guess what? AI was not meant for you to be reactive. It was meant for you to be predictive. And so that's the piece that you should hang your hat on.
I'd agree with all your budget proposals, Ahmad.
Hey, I'll take it. If it was that easy, my friend.
All the money you want.
Lisa or Megan, did you want to jump in there?
I mean, I think that, I think everyone has really hit on some of the primary things. I think the only other thing I would add is perhaps, and this is building up off of something Ahmad said about how everyone's working from home, including the contact centers. And that had a huge impact from us, on us, and the fact that we needed to bring the AI even stronger in, because they simply didn't have the agent, they didn't have the seats during, particularly at the very beginning of the pandemic, to handle the live calls as much. And so we need to bring the AI into an even stronger role than before with a lot of our clients. And it's also underscored some of the work that is being done with AI and other aspects in the conversational aspect, but in terms of redaction. So as as we're moving call center populations to work from home, then you can't have a clean desk policy anymore. So how can you support security concerns in real time through things like where an AI can actually be present during the call and redact out PII, so that we're not having those contact center agents being exposed to that sensitive information while working from home.
Yeah, I would agree with everything everyone has already said. Took the words right out of my mouth. I did really resonate with what you said, Ahmed, about AI being not reactive. You need to be proactive with what you're doing with it, because if you're waiting until you already have everything, all the ducks in a row, all the data to support it, everything has already happened. So now there's always a point. There's hopefully always going to be another moment where that can come in and really help you, but you've already missed this grand opportunity to take advantage.
Yeah, one thing, I guess, because to Ahmed's point, is that kind of doing the trade-offs is really the hard part, and it hasn't changed. That the technologies have changed, as Lisa pointed out, but doing that trade-off, self-service, and there's not unlimited funds, but kind of the language as well is that AI, you have budgets for AI and ML, but that's like saying you have budgets for technology. It doesn't really give you. It's like I don't know. It's looking for something. Whereas if really, to the point that people have made is, you discover the intent, you self-service with whatever technology as much as possible, where there's a real problem, not something that's spilled over because the technology isn't very good. You have a human interaction and you determine that intent. Because I mean, I've enjoyed this panel a lot, but it does drive home this, but as if anybody on this panel thought that there's no one answer, it's a whole collection of things. And then to Ahmad's point is that how do you optimize that, and really importantly, make the case, and I think to Deba's point is that there's no going back, nobody's going to branches as much as they used to. People aren't going to the office, traveling into Penn Station every day for the rest of their days. It'll be a mix. Some things will recover and return, but most of it, there'll be fair amount of permanent changes.
Definitely. And I think that actually brings us perfectly into our last slide, which is, where do you see the future of customer service headed over the next 5 years? So John, since you're already talking about the future, I'd love for you to jump in on this one.
I'm exhausted by my previous answer. I actually think, so it is, so the big thing that's changed is, as Deba said, there's no going back. You can't debate. You could debate the short-term effects and they're horrible in human terms and all the rest of it. But there's no kind of going back. You know, workplace is going to be more digital. The channels are going to shift. You know, call centers, you know, having 1,000 people, you know, cheek to cheek, you know, may not be the best model, and all the rest of it, and some kind of adjustment. But it's getting all those pieces to work together. But the factor to change is there. So I think it's how it all works together, and probably you know, we changed the language a bit on AI. I'm not advising AI4 for free, but you know, it is conversational AI to Lisa's point. IVR is a very strange kind of conversation, whereas conversational AI, you know, is more reflective of what you're trying to achieve. So it's not so much about the technology, it's almost like how it all fits together and what's the language.
I think what I would want to say is what I want to see in the next 5 years is more and more of the industry embracing what Ahmad said about how it's not just a cost center, and that, you know, investment in the better customer experience pays off dividends, and it creates revenue through customer loyalty. And you know, because as you said, putting any of these things in place is not, you know, that's not free. You have to invest in the technology, and not only do you have to invest in the technology, but like what Megan said, sometimes you have to go through iterations, you have to get learnings from your early experimentation. It's not just something you buy and put in place and you're done. Right? All of these things are an iterative process. They evolve. They have to get, you know, better, and you have to be willing to put that investment in there if you want to have that, to have the customer experience be good enough that people aren't going to want to, you know, scream, "Give me a human being," because I want out of this situation. And I think that the other thing that I really personally want to see in terms of how customer service, the intersection between customer service and AI evolve, and I'm seeing a little bit of it now, is the recognition that that siloization does not help anybody. So, you know, keeping the customer service by its own, in its own universe, is bad enough, and that there's often, you know, other aspects of the customer journey that are not intersecting with that. But also, even within customer service, and the fact that we have all of these different channels, we have the phone channel, we have the Facebook, we've got, you know, Twitter, we've got, and in many cases, each one of those is being handled by a completely separate bit of a completely separate group with a completely separate platform. And what we really need to recognize is that all needs to come together and be able to form one relationship with the customer, no matter what channel they reach out in.
Yeah, I would say, you know, I'll jump in. I couldn't agree more with Lisa. I think I see the future is going to be much more focused on, you know, customer journeys, and irrespective of what channel they come in. I think customer is a customer. They're trying to get something done, and what is the best way for them to get that done? What is the best way for the companies to get that done? And I think everybody will agree, generally, focusing on customer journeys actually have two sets of benefits. It's benefits the customers that they can actually get something done quicker, faster, much more accurate. Also benefits the companies, where they could get stuff done quicker, faster, cheaper, and much more less risky. And whenever there's a friction in the customer service or experience, generally there's friction internally and costs more, like by default, like typically that happens, right? So I see more and more that kind of a end-to-end customer journey focus, where both the customer view, internal view merge together, channels merge together, right? And then also as part of it, I think a lot of the simple, again, there's a spectrum, or the simple things will become fully digital, automated, straight through. There will be complex stuff, which will be purely human driven. And there'll be a lot in the middle, which will be kind of digitally guided, where it's a kind of a mixture of human and digital interactions. And I see more and more the spectrum will move towards more simple stuff being handled digitally, more things moving into the middle section, right? I see more and more that happen, which is a good thing for both our associates, for our company, but also for the customers, because we can have our associates focus much more on really kind of value-added interactions, not necessarily focused on the simple stuff.
Yeah, I have to do a better job of deciding where I jump in here because you're always a tough act to follow. So I'll say, again, I think all of this that we're sharing is fantastically aligned, right? We all have different voices from a different perspective, but I don't think we've said anything that's not been 1000% aligned. I think I'd close with this and say, the days of getting butts in seats are over, right? That sort of robotic, mechanical, detached kind of interaction, those days are long gone, right? And so we should think about, the idea of lowering the cost, right? Lowering the delivery of having sort of these bespoke, more personal, these humanized interactions where we're doing something like Lisa leveraging NLP, right? Understanding contextually prior to the folks getting to us and allowing our agents or our contact centers, whether they're omnichannel or not, to have a better and a richer engagement. That's where AI can do us justice, right? We want to be able to start triangulating, right? Extrapolating, taking all of that rich data, because today we have a million dimensions that we're barely really using, quite frankly, right? We want to be able to get that stirred up in a pot and bake a cake that everyone's going to be happy when they get a slice. And by that, what I mean is when folks contact us, regardless of channel, how much they channel hop, we want that integrated, really truly omni-channel without losing a beat. That's what will enable us and allow us. And by definition and by default, which is part of the harder piece of the education, is even the way we view SLAs and KPIs will change, right? Because satisfaction is not derived by speed alone, right? Satisfaction is how can I create loyalty and how can I create a network effect where you've had such a fantastic time. You're going to tell somebody else, what is that code for? CSAT and NPS, right? How do we contribute to those? And at the end of the day, then we're allowed and we're empowered to quantify this, and we can clearly show this return on investment for these dollars spent to do the things that we're talking about where AI intersects customer support.
I think I'm last, and I know we only have a couple seconds left, but just want to say I agree with everyone, especially with the SLAs. Really just redefining what success means and what loyalty means. And I agree that I think customer expectations will continue to heighten, and really having an omni-channel customer journey is important.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists. I know the audience is giving you a huge virtual round of applause, but we really appreciate you sharing all of these insights with us. This has been an awesome panel with so much great conversation. So thank you all for taking the time to participate with us today. All right, again, to the audience, thank you so much for joining us today for this AI4 webinar. We hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have. It's been an awesome experience, and we look forward to seeing you around. Thanks so much, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a privilege.
Thanks a lot. It was a real pleasure.
Awesome. Thank you all. Have a great day.
See ya.